My name is Whitney Nordvold, and I'm the Great Plains Good Health and Wellness Program Coordinator here at the Tribal Chairman's Health Board. And today we are going to be hearing about community gardening. But before we start this webinar for the Community Health Webinar Series, I just want to note a few housekeeping things. Please mute yourself, just so that we can eliminate as much background noise as possible. If you don't already receive these invites for this webinar series regularly, please just put your email address in the chat box, and I'll make sure that you get added to that listserv. Next month, we're going to be talking about PSE changes for sustainability. And just for any of the sub-awardees that are on right now, that is actually one of the required webinars for our sub-awardees. You don't necessarily have to be on that webinar. We would prefer that. That way we can answer any questions you have, but it will be recorded and a link will be sent out. And our own Shannon Udy will be presenting for that one. Please fill out your evaluations. We will have the evaluation link in the chat box, and then it will also be sent out in the follow-up email with the YouTube link for this webinar. And I will remind you again at the end of the webinar. And then if you can, just save your questions till the end, or you can just type them into the chat box, and I'll read them to Devin once we wrap up. So I'm just going to introduce Devin Ryder and kind of what he's going to be talking about today, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Devin Ryder grew up in Waubay, South Dakota, and received his BS in chemistry education from Northern State University in Aberdeen. He conducted undergraduate research at SDSU and graduate research at the University of Michigan. He also received his Master of Fine Arts in Science and Natural History Filmmaking from Montana State University. He's a science teacher at Lower Brule Tribal Schools and the executive director of Lower Brule Research, which is a nonprofit focused on giving more people the time and resources they need to ask and answer the questions that are important to them and their community. Devin is also a Robert Wood Johnson Foundation Culture of Health leader, and he's working in the area of education equity. And Devin, we're happy as a Lower Brule tribal member. I'm really happy to have you working in our community and doing awesome things. And he's going to be talking about community gardening today. He's kind of taken on a large portion of the responsibility to help with the Lower Brule School and community garden. Community-based gardening can improve nutrition, physical activity, community engagement, economic vitality for neighborhood and its residents, and provide environmental benefits to the community at large. This webinar is going to go over some of the general community gardening planning tips, and then it'll go through the timeline of the Lower Brule School and Community Garden as it works today. So Devin, I will let you take it from there, and we'll get started.
Okay. I have a bit of an issue, but I think I'm just going to talk.
Okay.
Sorry, I can hear my voice through my phone. Is there any way that I can just talk through my phone and mute my computer?
Yeah, that's totally fine. Try that and we'll see how well we can hear you. Make sure you unmute your phone or one of the other. Let's see here. I'm going to unmute your phone and then I'm going to mute your, there you go. Your phone's unmuted. Why don't you talk, Devin, and we'll see if I can hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Hello? Oh,
Yep,
thank you. Awesome. I was having trouble unmuting my phone for some reason. Awesome. Great. Thank you, Whitney. Yeah, I will just kind of get started here on community gardening. And tell you what we're going to talk about today. Basically, the timeline that we go through for our community and school garden, starting in the winter, getting things lined up for the spring, where we have planting, and then getting ready for the summer, and eventually kind of ending the growing year. And so that's what we're going to be going through. Can you see the slides?
Yep, we sure can.
Okay, thank you, Whitney. All right, so yeah, I'll just keep going here. The school and community garden in Lower Brule started with a meeting that actually I was at with Whitney at our tribal offices. Some people had gathered, some different officials from different programs, and some tribal council members, and there was a desire to start a community garden, and no one exactly knew what it should look like or how it should work, and we're just trying to get some. I was, and I guess I still am, a science teacher at the high school, and so I was interested in using gardening as a way to teach some science concepts and some hands-on ways to some kids, some chemistry and some biology and things like that. So I thought, oh, this could be a good thing to learn about, and maybe I could be involved in and help out. And so as we met first up at the tribal offices, and then we later had some meetings at the school, I could tell that there was definitely a desire for a school or community garden, but it just wasn't exactly sure how to get started, where we should go. And so during that time, we identified some places that could be a good garden. And we actually had a spot on our school grounds that had been a garden quite a few years ago that hadn't been used. And so we thought that that would be a potential good place to start. And I thought, as a science teacher and as someone who runs a nonprofit working with kids in the summer, I thought, hey, this could be a project that the kids that I work with could be involved in. And so that was kind of our winter meetings, just kind of making sure that everyone was on the same page. One thing I'm going to talk, I think it's the next slide here. The next thing that we started doing were some community meetings, just because we wanted to see, what did the community want? How could this work? I am not from Lower Brule. I actually grew up in Waubay, which is right on the edge of the Lake Traverse Reservation. And so it was kind of a new experience. I had only been in Lower Brule for less than a year. And so I had some motivation from our tribal council members saying, hey, could you kind of take the lead on this and get this going? And so I said, sure. And we started setting up a couple different meetings in the spring to try to see how many community members were interested in gardening. And at our first meeting, we had, probably, I think, 4 or 5 kind of more elderly women show up, and they were interested in gardening. And so I said, if you want to garden, I'm definitely here to help out and figure out how to do this. And so that was kind of our spring planning. We have also now, the last year we did actually a spring planting for just get some like tomatoes and stuff going before the actual planting outside. But yeah, this process of building trust, I guess, is kind of something that I've learned over the last couple of years. How to do a little bit better. That picture there on the left is actually a picture of the farm where my great-grandfather actually homesteaded on the Lake Traverse Reservation. And so one thing that I like to do when I introduce myself to people in the community or different community groups, and they kind of wonder, why is this guy here? What is he doing? I tell them a little bit about my personal history, that my family, I'm a white guy. My family benefited a lot from, the historical and current, inequalities that we see. And basically, as a person, I'm trying to understand what is my role in in this. I see these privileges and benefits that I've been given, like this farmland that my great-grandfather, then my grandfather, and this is the house where my mother grew up. They got this land and were able to benefit from it because of these unjust, policies that our federal government has had over the years. And so I think talking and being open about that from my perspective has been a really good thing for me in trying to just connect and help people understand a little bit more about who I am and really start a discussion. Just because as a white guy working on a reservation, I think it's sometimes people want to ignore the history that's there, and I think it's usually better just to try to talk about it and try to understand each other as we're trying to come together and build some trust in the community. So that's one thing that I've learned and that I now do at most of the meetings if I'm meeting new people or starting something new. But yeah, so next slide. After our spring meetings, I kind of went around and contacted some different groups in Lower Brule to see what was available for supplies. And so we have a wildlife program, and they had some drip irrigation from some shelter belts that they had put in that was extra that they said that they would donate to us. I was in contact with SDSU Extension, which is our university here, and they were able to put some money together to get us just some supplies like rakes and hoses and things to get off the ground so that we could, get some plants in the ground and start growing in this community garden where we started. So that was kind of my process for getting supplies, and yeah, just making sure that we had some stuff for people. And then as a teacher, I was able to, the first year, just using this small garden area next to the school, I was able to have students actually go out and plant. And now that's the picture on the left. On the right is our second year where we've actually had some grant money to build some raised beds on an old tennis court. And so, yeah, it's just, we're still exactly trying to figure out what the best way is to go about getting people together for planting and tilling. We'll probably be maybe even experimenting with some new stuff this year. We actually have garden coordinators who are going to be kind of taking over a little bit of my job and actually running more of the planning and making sure, deciding when to plant, how we should go about planting, all of that kind of stuff, which is great to have some people from the community kind of taking on that role. So yeah, so usually around mid-May is when we would plant, and you can see on the right we had some plants that we had already started a few weeks before. And then after planting, it's kind of the most challenging part of the garden, which is, the maintenance, education, harvesting. It's really kind of fun and easy to put some seeds in the ground and get them started. But when weeds start growing, when, you have a bunch of tomatoes that are ready to be picked and they need to be picked now, that can be a little bit more challenging. And also, as a teacher, I kind of have, most of the students are off in the summer, and so trying to use the garden as an educational space, it's a bit of a challenge exactly figuring out how to do that. And so we've generally had students from our school plant a small plot, and then in the spring, and then when they come back in the fall, actually do some of the harvesting of that plot. And then I've had the interns that I work with over the summer as part of my nonprofit help maintain that school plot. But other than that, we kind of have left it up to community members who want to garden as they want to, plant, harvest, and eat their food. And we're going to be, I think this year, trying to do some more outreach to figure out how to do this better, because we're not the best at it, but we have been able to, have kids harvest food. We've gotten it, on our salad bar at our school, which is great. Finding a place where, where there's a need for food is important. We've got an elderly nutrition program. We've got our tribal offices, and also our school summer lunch program, which is where we have been donating food. If someone, for instance, starts a plot and there's food that's, ready to be picked, but they're not, they're not picking it, so we don't want the food to go to waste. And so the last couple of years, we've ended up donating a decent amount of the food in the garden. And then the last part is kind of a fun part, and that's bringing people together to celebrate, the garden. And this is one of our celebrations towards the end of the summer last year, where we actually had a cookout. We had burgers and hot dogs, as well as a lot of food from the garden, salads. We had students, make pickles. We had students make zucchini bread. We had students make salsa, all from the garden. And so this was a celebration put on actually by the nonprofit that I run and the student interns that I work with over the summer. And so we had a few interns working on the community garden last summer, and so they put this celebration together. And that's always a really fun time to recognize, some of the people that have put in a lot of work and just get together and have a good time. So yeah, that is basically the timeline that I've used. Is always changing as we have some new garden coordinators this year. It's really going to be up to them and their conversations with community members as to kind of how to change it, how to make it better. But yeah, this is kind of getting a garden off the ground, and yeah.
Devin, can you tell us a little bit more about your nonprofit and how your interns utilize the garden for to learn, and maybe talk about some of the goals that you have with your students that you set each summer?
Sure. Yeah. So my nonprofit is really giving middle and high school students summer research experience. So they come in for 8 weeks over the summer, and they work just part-time, 20 hours a week. And they try to answer some important question that they or community members have identified as important. And so, for instance, last year, 3 of our interns worked on a project where the question was, how do we engage more people in community gardening? And so they set up, some different experiments as far as, putting out flyers, posting on Facebook. They created some social media videos, and they're trying to gauge, how do we get more people involved in the garden? And so, as I guess just from the nonprofit side, the garden it's just a nice resource that the kids can use, that we can kind of center some projects around. Yeah.
Another question that I'd like to hear you talk about is how has this garden influenced the science classroom?
So yeah, we've done a couple different experiments within the science classroom. Basically, they're very similar to any type of lab that you would do, at least that I have students do, where they try to ask a question that they can set up an experiment to test. So for instance, we can set up a question like, what is the best way to engage people in the community garden? Specifically within the school setting, we've asked questions like, how much does it cost to grow a cucumber? What is the best way to store carrots to keep them from going bad? You know, there's any question that you can think of and you can kind of set up an experiment for, you can use in the science classroom as, you know, kind of a scientific experiment and a way to teach kids the scientific process.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Does anybody else have specific questions for Devin? You can type them in the chat box, or you can just unmute yourself and ask that way too. Dolores is asking, how did you decide on the location of the garden?
Yeah, so we've actually had kind of two different spaces for gardening. One was a location that had been previously used, I think about 4 or 5 years ago, as a garden space. So it already had fencing set up. It already had kind of a close access to water, which were two things that were really nice. And so that made it fairly easy. The other space was actually a space that our principal had identified. It was some old tennis courts, and he wanted to kind of make these tennis courts look better, kind of find a use for them, because it was just a large enclosed space. So there was, you know, a big fence around this, what used to be asphalt tennis courts. And he had also thought that this was a good place where maybe people who had disabilities could have easier access, because you could actually drive right up to the tennis courts, and it was a fairly solid surface to get, you know, from your car into these tennis courts and walk around. And so we thought, well, it'd be great, you know, especially if we have elderly people who want to garden, to build some raised beds on those tennis courts so that it would just be easier for them to garden. And so now we kind of have two spaces where we garden at the moment, but I'm guessing that this next year we might actually probably take a year off of the one that's not a raised bed, just because there's a lot more weeding and a lot more work at that garden. I think we'll probably just focus on the raised beds this next year. Oh, yeah.
Thank you. Are there other questions?
It says, who built the raised beds? Was the material paid for by grant funds? Yes, the material was paid for by grant funds, actually through a program that Whitney was facilitating. And so those grant funds bought the lumber, and we actually had the kids who take shop class here at the high school, they actually constructed the raised beds.
And wasn't there, I feel like, didn't one of the interns do like some mini, not hoop houses, but smaller?
We've had interns. The interns I've worked with have built some smaller raised beds. And yeah, actually this summer, one of our intern projects is we're going to be building a few raised beds around Lower Brule in the community this summer, so that people don't have to travel so far to get to a garden. Yeah,
because this space is kind of like, it's not really in town, it's kind of on the edge.
It's on the edge of town, yeah. It's probably, you know, a 15-minute walk from, you know, the center of town. So it's a little bit out there. And yeah, one of our interns, he was the one who was trying to get more people engaged in the community garden. And he said one of the challenges is that the garden is kind of on the edge of town. People don't see it all the time. So I said, okay, would you like to do a project where we see, you know, if we built some small raised beds in town, you know, if that would engage more people? And he said, yeah, that'd be a great project. So he's going to be leading that project this summer.
Very cool. Can you highlight maybe a couple of the major barriers or challenges you've experienced over the last few years, and maybe some ways that you've overcome them, or moved around them, I guess?
Sure. Yeah, I think, some of the biggest challenges was just being new, 3 years ago, not knowing a lot of people, yet kind of having, the tribal council wanting me to take the lead on this project. And I guess I wasn't, yeah, it was definitely a challenge trying to connect with people. If you don't know them, I hadn't really developed the skills to share very well with people why I'm here, why I'm doing what I'm doing. And that's something that I'm still developing and working on today. And so, yeah, that was a challenge, and I think it still is to a large extent. There are definitely quite a few people who I've gotten to know fairly well, but there's a lot of people within the community that I haven't connected with yet. And so, yeah, I'm hopeful that as I kind of turn over kind of the leadership of this to the garden coordinators this next summer, that they will kind of be able to expand on that and engage even more people in gardening, because I've noticed that when I talk to people, lots of people want to garden, but actually getting the things planted, like knowing what to do with, some turnips that you've planted, or, some whatever food it might be, how to harvest it, how to cook it. There's a lot of, there's more, knowledge that people want here. And sometimes it feels a bit overwhelming because I'm not an expert on any of this stuff. I'd never grown anything before I started this garden. So.
Well, that just goes to show anybody can do it, right?
Yeah. If I had no idea. If you put seeds in the ground and give them some water, they're mostly going to grow. Like, it's not, some might die. So, I'm no expert, but we get food, and we have gotten plenty of food over the last few years, not really knowing what we're doing. So.
Can you, you've mentioned the tribal council and the school. You also mentioned extension. Can you highlight any other partnerships that had to happen to make this possible?
Yeah. The biggest connection, the reason that this is going and is as large as it is because of the connection with the Tribal Advisory Committee, which was part of a grant through the Great Plains Tribal Chairman's Health Board. And so there was some funds that were specifically aimed at improving health, and the people on that committee who were kind of in charge of delegating where those funds would be most useful were really pushing towards gardening. And so without that support, it would have been, we would still have a garden, but it wouldn't be as big or successful as it has been.
Okay. I'm trying to think of any other questions I can ask you to help tell the story. I was involved in it a lot, and it was a lot of fun, and I'm glad to have been a part of it. Does anybody else have any questions about community gardening in general? I'd be happy to answer them as well as Devin, or just specific questions about this particular project. Well, I'd just like to note that I think the partnerships were really so important. The community, what did we call it? The Tribal Advisory Committee, or the Community Wellness Coalition, was made up of lots of champions from different sectors throughout the community. So there was representatives from the community college, the school itself, the Head Start, the Boys and Girls Club. I know that they have a tribal council member that's still on the tribal advisory committee. So it took lots of resources and lots of tools. Oh, what's the other one? Devin, what is it? Oh, I feel so terrible that I can't remember his name. What's the gentleman from?
I think you're thinking of Daryl.
Yes,
from
Daryl.
NSCS.
Daryl Duvall. Yeah, he was another one that his knowledge of gardening and using agricultural practices was really influential as well. So whenever you're putting these kinds of projects together, think outside the box and ask everybody for suggestions, because you might get somebody who has lots of knowledge and information in a really random place. Cameron asked, what were the biggest obstacles you had to overcome in getting community interest?
Well, I guess just reaching community members is always a bit of a challenge. For our first, community meetings, all we did is post flyers around town, and then we posted on the school's Facebook page, as well as my nonprofit's Facebook page. And, we had 5 community members show up. It's not a lot, but for me, it says, if there's people that want it, and I have the ability and the skills to kind of help organize it and put it together, I'm more than happy to do that. And so I don't think we've exactly cracked the code of getting community involvement. I think having students involved over the summer has really expanded people's knowledge that there is a community garden. So having students create the social media videos was probably one of the biggest things that has pushed the idea of community gardening. We had 150 people show up to our celebration at the community garden, largely because it was, high school kids who created a couple social media videos saying, hey, come down to the garden for lunch to, try some of the food. And that, that had over a couple thousand views on Facebook. So that's people definitely know now that it's there, and there's people kind of recognize me. And yeah, just trying to reach out, being at community events. Like we have a family unity day. It's just like a large health fair in our community, being there and just, answering people's questions, having kids. I had kids go to, the health fair, and they presented on what they're, what they've been doing around the garden and what other people can do. And, we had a few more people sign up and actually come down and plant some food last summer because they had seen the kids at the health fair and saw and heard about what they were doing.
Cool. Cameron also asked, what's the reservation population served by the garden? And I think the on-reservation population is about 1,200 to 1,400. Ryan, do you know by chance? You're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Sorry to put you on the spot.
Yeah, really. I don't, which is even more embarrassing.
Oh, I'm sorry. I think, I just wrote a community report for this other program that Devin's been talking about. And I feel like it's like 1,300, but the community population of Lower Brule, like that lives in town, is little between 700 and 800.
Are you sure? I thought that total you mean the tribal population? I thought it was like 3,000.
No, on reservation.
Oh, on reservation.
He's just saying served by the garden, so it would be on reservation. The total number of tribal members is closer to 3,000, but on reservation meaning like
the boundaries.
Yeah, live in the boundaries of the reservation. I think is like 1,300 around there somewhere.
Yeah,
and then
12 or
the
1,300.
actual town of Lower Brule, between West Brule and Lower Brule, is about between 700 and 800.
Okay.
I don't know.
I really don't know. I apologize.
I'm sorry for putting you on the spot.
I can Google it if you want me to.
I think that's close. It might be, off because that was started 3 or 4 years ago. So, what was one? Oh, yes. Okay. One thing I wanted to mention about the community interest, I think the greatest obstacle with lots of programs, not just community gardens, but other programs as well, like this one, is just time. You just have to be consistent and do what you say you're going to do and keep showing up. Like Devin said, there was only 5 people at that first meeting. And Devin, there's projected to be about 20 people at the next meeting. So, I mean, that's a couple of years since the very first meeting. But
yeah.
But I think, if you show up and do what you say you're going to do and keep doing it and be consistent and dedicated to the cause, that's going to show that relationship that Devin was talking about really early on in the webinar, is that I'm here and I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing regardless of, the funding or some of those other things that are kind of hit or miss sometimes.
Well, just to jump in, the exciting thing too, in Devin's case, you've been here for multiple meetings too. Lots of times our meetings are the same people. There are a lot of representatives that are frequently there. And the exciting thing for Devin's project is, because of the school and because of the other, well, you get a reward in the end because you get food, fresh food, but he's got other people participating. He's got community members that aren't in some of the other meetings that we have participating. So kudos, or whatever term you want to use, for him in getting that done. I'll be quiet again now.
Thank you for your comment, Brian. It was welcome. Does anybody else have any other questions? I just put the evaluation link. I sent it to somebody privately. Sorry. There, okay. There it is for everyone to see. So thank you so much, Devin, for sharing today. This was a little bit different. It was a little bit more discussion-like, and I think that's engaging and fun to do things a little different every now and then. Your insight and the story of the project is fun to hear about for me. I'm a little biased, though, I guess, because I enjoy gardening and because I'm from Lower Brule. So, so just to wrap up, guys, don't forget that next month, let me double check the date so I don't tell you the wrong one. April 11th, we're going to be hearing from Shannon, and we're going to be talking about PSE and sustainability. That's really what the Good Health and Wellness program is based on, is making sustainable changes that create health for the long term in communities. And so we're looking forward to hearing from her on that. Don't forget to please fill out the evaluation. I've shared it several times now, and I'll send it to you again in an email. And again, if you didn't give us your email address and you want to be invited or get reminders about the other webinars, please do that. And I think that's it. So thank you all for getting on today, and we hope to see you next month, and have a great day.